What if the pyramids are not just ancient tombs, but the last surviving evidence of knowledge our civilization has forgotten? A structure older than recorded history, built with impossible precision, surrounded by deaths, curses, and secrets that explorers, scientists, and even emperors could never fully explain. What if one of the most famous monuments in human history is still hiding a story we barely understand? Not a small detail, not a missing name in a dusty record, but an entirely different story about the past. For most of my life, I believed what almost everyone else believes about the pyramids of Egypt. I grew up hearing the same explanation repeated in books, documentaries, and classrooms. The pyramids were royal tombs. They were built more than 4,000 years ago by ancient Egyptian workers using simple tools, ramps, and an extraordinary amount of human labor. It sounded impressive, of course, but it also sounded complete, as if the mystery had already been solved. Yet something about that explanation always left me with a strange feeling. The pyramids never felt like ordinary ancient ruins. Even in photographs, they seem different from every other structure humans have ever built. They don't look like the remains of a lost city. They don't look like temples or fortresses. They look deliberate, calculated, almost like a message carved into the surface of the earth itself. And the more I looked into them, the more I realized that the story we are told about the pyramids might only be part of the truth. Think about it. The Great Pyramid of Giza is the last surviving wonder of the ancient world. Every other wonder described by ancient historians has vanished over time, destroyed by earthquakes, wars, or simply the slow erosion of centuries. But the Great Pyramid is still there, still towering above the desert, still dominating the skyline near Cairo, as if it was built yesterday. More than 4,000 years have passed since its construction, yet it remains one of the most precise structures ever created by human hands. And that is where the questions begin. Because the deeper you look at the pyramids, the more they start to challenge what we think we know about the ancient world. The Great Pyramid alone contains roughly 2.3 million blocks of stone, each block weighing several tons. Some weighing far more. These stones were cut, transported, and positioned with a level of accuracy that modern engineers still find remarkable. But what fascinates me isn't just the scale of the pyramid. It's the intention behind it. Every side of the pyramid aligns almost perfectly with the four cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. The accuracy is so precise that even small errors are nearly impossible to detect. Why would ancient builders care so deeply about aligning a tomb with the earth itself? Then there is the shape. At first glance, the pyramid seems simple, four triangular sides meeting at a single point. But aerial observations reveal something unexpected. Each side of the Great Pyramid is slightly concave, creating 8 subtle faces instead of 4. This detail is so subtle that it remained unnoticed for thousands of years. Who designed something like that? And why? These are the kinds of questions that kept pulling me deeper into the mystery. Because the pyramids are not just large piles of stone. They are precise, measured, engineered, and they have survived thousands of years of earthquakes, desert winds, and human interference. Sometimes when I think about them, I try to imagine the moment when the final stone was placed on the Great Pyramid. Imagine standing in the desert and looking up at a structure taller than anything humans had ever built before. No cranes, no engines, no modern machinery. Just knowledge, planning, and an enormous amount of determination. That moment must have felt unbelievable. But the truth is, we still don't fully understand how it was done. And that's exactly what drew me into this journey. Because the pyramids are not just relics of ancient Egypt. They are one of the greatest unsolved puzzles in human history. Welcome to Hidden Truth Videos. If you're someone who enjoys exploring the mysteries that history hasn't completely explained, then you're in the right place. On this channel, we dive into questions that sit at the edge of what we know, the strange, the unexplained, and the fascinating stories hidden behind the surface of our world. If this kind of journey excites you, take a moment to subscribe and support the channel. Your support helps keep these explorations going and allows us to continue uncovering more incredible stories like the one we're about to explore. Because the deeper we go into the story of the pyramids, the more extraordinary it becomes. Standing on the Giza Plateau today, you can see three massive pyramids rising from the desert, the pyramids of Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure. Nearby sits the Great Sphinx, a colossal statue with the body of a lion and the face of a human, silently watching over the plateau. For centuries, travelers have stood at this site and asked the same question. Who built these monuments? The traditional answer seems simple enough. Pharaoh Khufu ordered the construction of the Great Pyramid around 2500 BC during the 4th dynasty of Egypt's Old Kingdom. Tens of thousands of workers labored for decades to complete the project, and there is evidence supporting this view. Archaeologists have discovered workers' villages near the pyramids. Tools used in quarrying stone have been found. Ancient graffiti left by construction crews inside hidden chambers suggests organized teams of laborers working together on the project. All of this indicates that the pyramids were indeed built by ancient Egyptians. But the real mystery begins when we ask how they did it. Because the pyramids are not just large, they are incredibly precise. The base of the Great Pyramid is almost perfectly level. The four sides form an almost perfect square. The internal chambers are constructed from enormous granite blocks that weigh dozens of tons. Even today, moving stones of that size requires heavy machinery. So when I look at the pyramids, I don't see them as impossible, but I do see them as extraordinary. Extraordinary enough that they deserve more than a simple explanation. They deserve curiosity. They deserve investigation. And most of all, they deserve questions. Because once you begin asking questions about the pyramids, the mystery grows larger with every step. How did ancient builders transport millions of tons of stone across the desert? How did they achieve such astonishing accuracy without modern instruments? And perhaps the most fascinating question of all, what knowledge did they possess that allowed them to create something that has endured for thousands of years? These are the questions that pulled me deeper into this story. And as we continue exploring, we'll look beyond the surface of the pyramids, beyond the simple explanations, and examine the details that make these ancient structures one of the most captivating mysteries in human history. Because once you start examining the engineering behind the pyramids, something remarkable becomes clear. The people who built them understood far more about construction, planning, and precision than we often assume. And the deeper we look into how these structures were built, the more astonishing the story becomes. And once you begin looking closely at the engineering behind the pyramids, the story becomes even more astonishing. The first time I seriously tried to understand how the Great Pyramid was built, I made a mistake that many people make. I looked at pictures, admired the size, and assumed the explanation must be straightforward. After all, if historians have studied the pyramids for centuries, surely the construction methods must be clear by now. But the deeper I went, the more I realized something unsettling. The pyramids are not just impressive, they are unbelievably precise. And precision on that scale is never accidental. Let's start with the raw numbers, because the numbers alone tell a story that almost feels unreal. The Great Pyramid of Giza is estimated to contain about 2.3 million blocks of stone. Each block weighs, on average, between 2 and 4 tons. Some stones inside the structure weigh much more. The granite beams above the king's chamber can weigh 50 to 70 tons each. Try to imagine moving a single block that heavy. Now imagine doing it more than 2 million times, for decades, without modern machines. Even if we accept the commonly suggested timeline of about 20 years for the pyramid's construction, the pace of work becomes almost difficult to comprehend. To complete the structure within that time frame, builders would have needed to position hundreds of massive stones every day without pause. Not occasionally, every single day. day after day, year after year. And that raises an obvious question. Not a sensational one, just a practical one. How did they organize something on that scale? Ancient Egypt was certainly capable of large projects. Temples, canals, monuments, and irrigation systems demonstrate that Egyptian society had impressive administrative skills. Workers could be mobilized, food could be transported, labor could be coordinated. But the pyramid required something even more complex. It required planning. The limestone blocks used for the outer structure were quarried relatively close to the site, which makes sense. But the granite used in the internal chambers came from Aswan, nearly 500 miles to the south. Transporting those stones would have required moving massive loads along the Nile River and then hauling them across the desert plateau. Even today, moving a 70-ton stone requires careful logistics. So when I imagine the ancient builders accomplishing this thousands of years ago, I can't help but feel a sense of respect for the intelligence behind the operation. Whoever designed this project understood far more than simple stone cutting. They understood systems, and systems require knowledge. One of the most widely discussed theories about pyramid construction involves ramps. According to this idea, workers built large sloping ramps made of mud brick and limestone chips. These ramps would allow teams of workers to drag heavy stones upward as the pyramid gradually grew taller. On paper, the idea seems logical, but when engineers attempt to model this approach, complications begin to appear. To reach the upper sections of the pyramid, a ramp would need to be enormous. Some estimates suggest that such a ramp could be longer than the pyramid itself. Building and dismantling such structures would require enormous additional labor. Other theories suggest spiral ramps wrapping around the outside of the pyramid, or internal ramps built within the structure as construction progressed. Each of these ideas attempts to solve the same puzzle: how to lift extremely heavy stones to great heights using only ancient tools. Some researchers even believe the answer may involve multiple techniques used together. But even if we eventually determine the exact method, there is another aspect of the pyramids that continues to surprise engineers: their accuracy. When you stand at the base of the Great Pyramid, it's easy to forget that the structure was built without modern surveying instruments. Yet the base forms an almost perfect square. The difference in length between the sides is incredibly small considering the size of the structure. Even more remarkable is the orientation. The pyramid is aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. The accuracy is so precise that the pyramid deviates from true north by only a tiny fraction of a degree. This detail has fascinated scientists for decades. How did ancient builders determine true north so accurately? Some researchers believe the Egyptians observed specific stars crossing the night sky. By tracking the movement of certain stars and marking their positions carefully, they may have been able to determine the direction of the Earth's axis with surprising precision. Others suggest solar methods involving shadows cast by vertical poles. What fascinates me is not necessarily which method they used, but the fact that they cared enough to align the structure so perfectly in the first place. That level of precision suggests intention. It suggests that the pyramid was not simply built as quickly as possible. It was designed. And design means someone was thinking very carefully about the relationship between the structure and the world around it. Then there is one of the strangest architectural details of the Great Pyramid, something that remained unnoticed for thousands of years. Most people believe the pyramid has 4 sides, but technically, it has 8. Each face of the pyramid is slightly concave, bending inward along the center line. This creates 8 subtle surfaces instead of 4 flat planes. The indentation is so slight that it can only be clearly observed from the air during specific lighting conditions, usually at sunrise or sunset. This feature was discovered relatively recently when aerial photographs revealed the unusual shape. When I first learned about this detail, I remember pausing for a moment. because creating a concave surface intentionally on a structure of that size would require extraordinary planning. The builders would need to control the placement of thousands of blocks with incredible accuracy. Why do that? Some engineers believe the concave design might help stabilize the structure by distributing weight more effectively across the pyramid's massive faces. Others believe it may have aesthetic or symbolic significance. But regardless of the reason, the feature shows that the builders were thinking about more than just stacking stones. They were shaping a structure. Inside the pyramid, the complexity continues. The internal passages and chambers are arranged in ways that still puzzle researchers. The Grand Gallery, for example, is a long ascending corridor with a steep angle and a carefully designed corbelled ceiling. The engineering required to construct this gallery suggests a deep understanding of weight distribution. Above the king's chamber, a series of relieving chambers were built to redirect the immense pressure of the stone above. Without these chambers, the granite ceiling of the chamber would likely have collapsed under the enormous weight. These details reveal something important. The builders were not experimenting randomly. They understood the forces involved. They anticipated the pressure. They designed solutions before problems occurred. And when you step back and look at the pyramid as a whole, it becomes clear that the structure was not built in pieces without a plan. It was conceived as a complete design from the beginning. Every block had a purpose. Every corridor had a function. Every measurement had to align with the overall structure. When I imagine the architects responsible for this design, I don't picture primitive builders struggling with stones. I picture careful observers, people who studied geometry, people who understood balance, people who knew that if even a small mistake occurred early in construction, the entire structure could become unstable. And yet thousands of years later, the pyramid still stands. Storms have passed over it. Earthquakes have shaken the region. Entire empires have collapsed. But the structure remains largely intact. That durability alone tells us something remarkable about the minds behind its creation. The pyramids were not built only for the present. They were built for eternity. And that raises a deeper question. If ancient Egyptian builders possessed such advanced knowledge of construction, planning, and alignment, what else did they understand about the world around them? Because when researchers began looking at the pyramids not just as engineering projects, but as part of a larger landscape, a landscape connected to geology, climate, and even the stars, another layer of mystery began to emerge. A mystery that shifts the question away from how the pyramids were built, and towards something even more intriguing: when they were built, and whether the history we believe we know is truly the complete story. And once the conversation shifts from how the pyramids were built to when they might have been built, the mystery suddenly becomes far deeper than architecture alone. For a long time, I believed the timeline of ancient Egypt was firmly settled. Dynasties, pharaohs, monuments, all carefully placed along a historical line stretching back roughly 5,000 years. The pyramids of Giza fit neatly into that timeline, built during Egypt's Old Kingdom under the rule of powerful kings who commanded enormous resources. But history has a way of becoming more complicated the closer you look at it. The deeper I explored the subject, the more I realized that the pyramids sit at the intersection of several debates that historians, geologists, and archaeologists still discuss today. Not because scholars are confused, but because new evidence sometimes raises questions that older explanations did not fully consider. One of the most fascinating of these discussions begins with a monument that stands silently beside the pyramids, the Great Sphinx. The Sphinx is one of the most recognizable statues on Earth. Its body stretches across the Giza Plateau like a massive guardian carved directly from the bedrock. With the body of a lion and the head of a human, the statue seems to watch endlessly over the desert. Traditional Egyptology attributes the Sphinx to the reign of Pharaoh Khafra, placing its construction roughly around 2500 BC, around the same time the nearby pyramids were built. For many years, that explanation seemed straightforward. But in the late 20th century, a small group of geologists began examining the surface of the Sphinx more closely. What caught their attention were the erosion patterns carved into the limestone body of the statue. Instead of the horizontal weathering that desert winds typically produce, some of the erosion channels appeared vertical and rounded, resembling patterns created by long periods of heavy rainfall. That observation led to a provocative question. If the erosion was caused by significant rainfall, when would that rainfall have occurred? Today, the Giza Plateau is part of a dry desert climate. Rainfall in the region is minimal, but geological studies suggest that thousands of years before the rise of dynastic Egypt, the climate of North Africa was dramatically different. In distant prehistoric periods, the region experienced far more rainfall than it does today. Some researchers therefore proposed a controversial possibility. The original carving of the Sphinx might date back to a much wetter era. If that interpretation were correct, it could push the origins of the monument thousands of years earlier than traditionally believed. Now, it's important to say that many Egyptologists strongly disagree with this interpretation. They argue that the erosion could be explained by other geological processes or by structural weaknesses in the limestone layers. But what fascinates me is not necessarily the final answer. It's the fact that such debates exist at all, because they remind us that the story of the ancient world is still being written. The pyramids may seem ancient beyond imagination, but from the perspective of human history, our scientific understanding of them is still relatively young. Archaeology itself is barely 200 years old. And every generation brings new technologies that allow us to examine ancient sites in ways that previous scholars could not. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, high-resolution geological analysis. Each new method sometimes reveals details that challenge long-standing assumptions. And when those details appear around a structure as iconic as the pyramids, curiosity naturally grows. Another intriguing aspect of the Giza Plateau involves the astronomical alignments associated with the pyramids themselves. Ancient civilizations across the world paid careful attention to the sky. Long before modern astronomy, the movement of stars and planets served as a calendar for agriculture, navigation, and religious symbolism. The pyramids seem to reflect that cosmic awareness. The three main pyramids of Giza are arranged in a pattern that some researchers believe resembles the three stars of Orion's belt. This idea became widely known as the Orion correlation theory. According to this interpretation, the pyramids were intentionally positioned to mirror the stars associated with Osiris, the Egyptian god of the afterlife. The idea is compelling because Egyptian mythology placed great importance on the heavens. Pharaohs were often believed to join the stars after death, becoming part of the eternal cosmos. However, the theory remains controversial. Some astronomers argue that the alignment between the pyramids and Orion's belt is not precise enough to confirm intentional design. Others believe the resemblance may be coincidental. Still, what I find fascinating about the debate is the larger implication. Whether or not the pyramids mirror Orion exactly, the builders clearly possessed a sophisticated awareness of the sky. The orientation of the pyramids toward the cardinal directions already demonstrates that. But when we consider ancient cultures more broadly, we see the same pattern repeated again and again. Monuments aligned with solstices, temples oriented toward specific stars, sacred structures built to reflect celestial movements. It seems that ancient people saw the sky not merely as a backdrop, but as a guide for understanding existence itself. And that idea leads naturally to another theme that often appears when people discuss ancient mysteries: the possibility of lost civilizations. Throughout history, cultures across the world have preserved stories about earlier worlds that were destroyed by catastrophe. Flood myths appear in ancient Mesopotamia, in Greek traditions, in Hindu texts, and in many indigenous cultures. These stories often describe powerful societies that vanished long before the current age of humanity. One of the most famous of these legends comes from the writings of the Greek philosopher Plato. He described a civilization called Atlantis, a powerful island society that supposedly existed thousands of years before ancient Greece and was eventually destroyed by a massive catastrophe. Most historians interpret Plato's story as a philosophical allegory rather than a literal historical account. Yet the idea of lost civilizations has never completely disappeared from the human imagination. Part of the reason, I think, is that archaeology occasionally surprises us. There was a time when historians believed large monumental structures only appeared after humans developed agriculture and permanent cities. Then sites like Göbekli Tepe were discovered. Located in modern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe is a massive stone complex built more than 11,000 years ago. Its pillars and carvings were constructed by people who had not yet developed traditional farming societies. That discovery forced historians to reconsider assumptions about the timeline of human civilization. If monumental architecture existed that early, what else might still be hidden beneath the surface of the Earth? Of course, that does not mean the pyramids were built by unknown advanced civilizations. But it does remind us that history is rarely as simple as we once believed. Our understanding of the past evolves as new evidence appears. And sometimes the most ancient structures raise the most enduring questions. When I think about the pyramids in this context, I find myself less interested in dramatic theories and more fascinated by the broader mystery of human knowledge. Who were the people who first imagined these structures? What ideas shaped their understanding of the world? How did their beliefs about life, death, and the cosmos influence the monuments they created? Because even if the pyramids were built exactly when historians say they were, they still represent something extraordinary. They represent the ability of human beings to think beyond their own lifetimes, to imagine structures that would stand for thousands of years, to create monuments that would speak across generations. And perhaps that is the most powerful mystery of all. Not whether the pyramids were built by lost civilizations or unknown forces, but how ancient people, living in a world without modern technology, could create structures so enduring that they still challenge our understanding today. And as we move deeper into the story of ancient Egypt, another mystery begins to unfold. A mystery not about stones or stars, but about a young king whose tomb remained sealed for more than 3,000 years. Because when the burial chamber of Tutankhamun was finally opened in the early 20th century, the world expected treasure. What it did not expect was a legend that would spread across the globe. The legend of a curse. And if the pyramids invite us to question how ancient knowledge once shaped stone and sky, the story of Tutankhamun reminds us that Egypt's mysteries are not only carved in monuments, but also buried in the fragile history of human lives. The first time I heard the name Tutankhamun, it sounded almost mythical. King Tut, the boy pharaoh with the golden mask, a ruler who died young, but somehow became the most famous pharaoh in history. For a long time, I assumed he must have been one of the most powerful kings of ancient Egypt. But the truth is far more surprising. Tutankhamun was not a great conqueror. He did not rule for decades, build enormous temples, or lead legendary armies. In fact, his reign was remarkably short and, by most historical standards, relatively quiet. He became pharaoh at around 9 years old and died roughly 10 years later, at the age of 19. And yet today, his name is known across the entire world. Not because of his power, but because of the extraordinary story that unfolded more than 3,000 years after his death. In the early 20th century, the Valley of the Kings in Egypt had already been explored by archaeologists for decades. Tomb after tomb had been discovered and catalogued. Many experts believed that the valley had given up nearly all its secrets. But one man refused to accept that conclusion. His name was Howard Carter. Carter was a British archaeologist who had spent years studying the ancient tombs of Egyptian rulers. He believed that one royal burial site had not yet been found, the tomb of Tutankhamun. Despite years of searching, the evidence remained elusive. Excavations continued season after season with little success. The work was expensive, exhausting, and uncertain. Eventually, Carter's financial backer, Lord Carnarvon, began to lose patience. Funding an archaeological expedition for years without results was not easy to justify. Carter was reportedly told that the next season might be the last chance. Then, in November of 1922, something remarkable happened. A worker clearing debris near an ancient hut struck a stone step buried beneath the sand. When the team uncovered more of the staircase, they realized it led downward into the bedrock. At the bottom stood a sealed doorway bearing royal seals. For Carter, this moment must have been electric. The doorway suggested a tomb that had remained sealed for thousands of years. After carefully opening a small hole in the entrance, Carter peered inside with a candle. Lord Carnarvon stood behind him and asked the question that would later become famous in historical accounts. "Can you see anything?" Carter paused, allowing his eyes to adjust to the darkness. Then he answered quietly, "Yes, wonderful things." Inside the tomb were objects untouched since the Bronze Age. Golden statues, ceremonial chariots, intricate jewelry, weapons, furniture, and everyday items placed there to accompany the young king into the afterlife. Thousands of artifacts filled the chambers, each one offering a glimpse into the life of ancient Egyptian royalty. The discovery quickly became one of the greatest archaeological finds in human history. Newspapers across the world published the story. Photographs of the golden burial mask spread through magazines and museums. For the first time, people felt as if they were looking directly into the face of a pharaoh who had lived more than 3,000 years earlier. But shortly after the tomb was opened, something unexpected happened. In April of 1923, Lord Carnarvon fell ill while staying in Cairo. What began as an infected mosquito bite eventually led to blood poisoning. Within days, he was dead. The timing was eerie. Almost immediately, rumors began spreading through newspapers and radio reports. Journalists searching for dramatic headlines began connecting Carnarvon's death to the tomb itself. Had the pharaoh's resting place been disturbed? Had an ancient warning been ignored? Soon a phrase began appearing in headlines around the world. The curse of the pharaoh. According to the legend, ancient Egyptian priests had placed a supernatural curse on the tomb to protect it from intruders. Anyone who dared to disturb the burial chamber would suffer terrible consequences. The story was irresistible. It combined ancient mystery, royal treasure, and the thrill of forbidden knowledge. As other people connected to the excavation later died from various causes, newspapers continued feeding the narrative. Each new death seemed to strengthen the idea that something beyond coincidence might be happening. For many readers at the time, the curse felt real. But as the years passed, scientists began examining the story more carefully. One of the first things researchers noticed was that many members of Carter's team lived long lives after the discovery. Howard Carter himself continued his work for years and died in 1939, nearly 2 decades after the tomb had been opened. If a supernatural curse truly existed, it seemed oddly selective. Still, the deaths surrounding the expedition raised legitimate questions. Could there have been another explanation? Some researchers began exploring the possibility that the sealed environment inside the tomb had preserved harmful microorganisms. Ancient burial chambers often contained organic materials such as food offerings, fabrics, and wooden objects. Over thousands of years, certain molds and bacteria could develop within such environments. When the tomb was opened, those microorganisms might have been released into the air. For people entering the chamber without modern protective equipment, exposure to ancient spores could potentially cause respiratory illness or severe infections. Medical studies conducted later suggested that certain molds found in tomb environments can indeed produce dangerous toxins. This explanation may not sound as dramatic as a supernatural curse, but in some ways it is equally fascinating, because it reminds us that the ancient world was not only mysterious, it was also biological. Tombs sealed for millennia could preserve microscopic organisms that remained dormant until the moment fresh air entered the chamber. Yet even if the curse can be explained scientifically, the story of Tutankhamun contains another remarkable detail that continues to captivate researchers. Among the treasures discovered in the tomb were two ceremonial daggers wrapped within the linen layers surrounding the pharaoh's mummified body. One dagger had a golden blade. The other was made of iron. At first glance, that might not seem unusual. But when scientists analyzed the metal composition of the iron blade many decades later, they discovered something astonishing. The iron contained unusually high levels of nickel and cobalt, a chemical signature typical of meteorites. In other words, the metal had come from space. Long before humans developed large-scale iron production, ancient Egyptians occasionally used meteoritic iron, rare fragments of cosmic metal that had fallen to Earth from the sky. To them, this material must have seemed extraordinary. In ancient Egyptian language, iron was sometimes described as metal from the sky. When I first learned about that dagger, I found myself imagining how ancient people might have viewed such an object. A blade forged from a stone that fell from the heavens. A weapon placed beside a young king on his journey into the afterlife. There is something deeply symbolic about that image. A ruler buried with a fragment of the cosmos. And when you think about it, that small artifact reflects something profound about ancient Egyptian culture. Their world was not separated from the universe above them. The stars, the gods, the afterlife, the journey of the soul, all of these ideas were connected. And perhaps that is why the story of Tutankhamun continues to fascinate people today. Not just because of the treasure, not just because of the legend of the curse, but because his tomb offers a rare window into how ancient Egyptians understood life, death, and the universe itself. Still, the mysteries of Egypt do not end with royal tombs. Because even beyond the treasures of Tutankhamun, there are stories of explorers, writers, and even powerful historical figures who claim to experience something unusual inside the pyramids themselves. Stories that raise an entirely different kind of question. Not about archaeology, not about history, but about whether the pyramids might possess properties that modern science is only beginning to explore. And if the story of Tutankhamun reminds us how ancient Egypt guarded its dead with extraordinary care, the deeper mystery may lie within the pyramids themselves, places where some visitors have claimed to encounter something far more difficult to explain. The first time I read about people spending the night inside the Great Pyramid, I remember wondering what that experience must actually feel like. Not as a tourist walking through during the day with a guide and a flashlight, but alone, completely alone. Sitting in a chamber carved from massive granite blocks, surrounded by stone that has been standing in the same place for thousands of years. Imagine the silence. Not the kind of silence we experience in modern buildings, where distant sounds always find a way in. Inside the pyramid, the silence is different. The thick walls absorb the outside world. Wind from the desert barely reaches the interior corridors. Even footsteps echo strangely along the narrow passages. It is the kind of silence that forces you to become aware of your own breathing. Perhaps that is why the stories that come from inside the pyramid feel so unsettling. One of the most famous involves Napoleon Bonaparte. During his Egyptian campaign in 1798, Napoleon did not arrive in Egypt only as a military leader. He brought with him a group of scholars, scientists, engineers, and artists whose mission was to study the ancient civilization of the Nile. Napoleon was deeply curious about history. He believed that understanding ancient cultures could help shape the future of modern society. And like many visitors before him, he was drawn to the pyramids. According to several accounts that circulated among historians and writers in the years that followed, Napoleon once requested to spend time alone inside the Great Pyramid, specifically in the chamber known as the King's Chamber. The King's Chamber sits deep inside the pyramid. Its walls are constructed from enormous blocks of granite, and the room itself is almost completely bare. At its center rests a massive stone sarcophagus, empty and silent. Napoleon reportedly asked his companions to leave him there alone. When he emerged hours later, those who saw him claimed that his expression had changed. He appeared pale and shaken, as if something inside the pyramid had deeply unsettled him. Naturally, the people around him asked what had happened. Napoleon refused to explain. Years later, one of his close friends reportedly asked him again about the experience. According to the story, Napoleon began to answer but stopped himself and said something along the lines of, "You would not believe me even if I told you." Now, historians debate whether this story is completely accurate or partly embellished over time. But what fascinates me is not whether the exact details are true. It is the fact that similar stories appear again and again. Throughout the 20th century, several explorers, writers, and researchers described unusual sensations inside the Great Pyramid. Some spoke about feeling disoriented, as if the geometry of the space affected their sense of balance. Others described a strange awareness of sound and vibration within the stone walls. One British writer, Paul Brunton, spent a night inside the king's chamber in the early 20th century. In his writings, he described the overwhelming silence of the pyramid and the psychological intensity of being alone inside a structure built thousands of years ago. He wrote about moments when the darkness seemed almost alive, when the mind begins to imagine shapes in the shadows, when time itself feels strangely distorted. Reading those descriptions, I realized something important. The pyramid does not need supernatural powers to affect people. The environment itself is powerful. When you place a human being in an ancient stone chamber with no windows, no outside sound, and walls that have existed for millennia, the mind begins to respond in ways we do not fully anticipate. But there may also be physical factors at play. Some modern researchers have studied the interior chambers of the pyramid and detected small electromagnetic effects within certain areas. Granite, the stone used in the king's chamber, contains quartz crystals. Under pressure, quartz can generate tiny electrical charges, a phenomenon known as the piezoelectric effect. This does not mean the pyramid is producing mysterious energy fields, but it does mean the environment inside the structure is not entirely inert. Subtle vibrations, temperature differences, and electromagnetic activity could potentially influence human perception, especially in conditions of extreme silence and isolation. Then there is another idea that occasionally appears in discussions about pyramids. The concept, sometimes referred to as pyramid energy. According to this idea, the geometric shape of the pyramid might interact with natural energy fields on Earth. Some enthusiasts claim that pyramid structures can preserve organic material, sharpen blades, or influence biological processes. Most scientists remain skeptical of these claims. Controlled experiments have not produced consistent evidence supporting extraordinary energy effects inside pyramid shapes. Still, the persistence of these ideas reveals something about the way humans respond to ancient structures. The pyramids inspire imagination. They inspire speculation. And perhaps most importantly, they inspire curiosity. Because when you stand in front of the Great Pyramid, you cannot escape the feeling that you are looking at something profoundly intentional. The scale, the precision, the endurance of the structure. All of it suggests that the builders were thinking beyond their own lifetimes. They were creating something meant to last. Something meant to endure centuries, even millennia. And in that sense, they succeeded beyond imagination. The pyramids have outlived the kings who commissioned them, the empires that surrounded them, and even the languages that once described them. Yet the questions remain. Who truly designed them? How did ancient engineers coordinate such a massive project with tools that seem so simple by modern standards? And what ideas about life, death, and the cosmos inspired people to dedicate decades of effort to building these monumental structures? For me, the pyramids are not simply ancient architecture. They are reminders that human history is far deeper and more complex than we sometimes assume. Every generation believes it has uncovered the full story of the past. But time and again, new discoveries remind us that history still holds secrets. Perhaps one day, new technology will reveal hidden chambers beneath the Giza Plateau. Perhaps archaeologists will uncover documents or artifacts that explain the methods behind the construction. Or perhaps the pyramids will remain partially mysterious forever. And maybe that is not a failure of science. Maybe it is part of the beauty of history itself. Because the pyramids are not just monuments to ancient kings. They are monuments to human curiosity. They remind us that our ancestors looked at the world with the same sense of wonder that we feel today. They studied the sky, observed the land, and built structures that carried meaning far beyond their physical form. Standing in the shadow of the pyramids, it becomes impossible not to ask the same questions that travelers, scholars, and dreamers have asked for centuries. What else about our past have we forgotten? What knowledge once existed that we are only beginning to rediscover? And if the pyramids have been silently watching humanity for thousands of years, what other stories might they still be waiting to reveal? When we step back and look at everything we've explored, the astonishing engineering of the pyramids, the debates about their age, the mysteries surrounding ancient knowledge, and the strange stories connected to Tutankhamun and the chambers within these monumental structures, one thing becomes very clear. The pyramids are not just ancient buildings. They are reminders of how much humanity is still trying to understand about its own past. For thousands of years, these massive structures have stood quietly in the Egyptian desert. Empires have risen and fallen around them. Entire civilizations have disappeared. Yet the pyramids remain almost unchanged, as if patiently waiting for each new generation to come along and ask the same questions all over again. And perhaps that is the real power of places like this. They remind us that history is not simply a collection of facts carved in stone. It is an ongoing conversation between the past and the present. Every discovery, every new theory, every careful study adds another piece to a puzzle that may never be completely finished. What fascinates me most is not the possibility of supernatural secrets or lost technologies. It is the realization that ancient people, living in a world so different from ours, were capable of thinking on a scale that stretched far beyond their own lifetimes. They planned, calculated, and built structures that they knew might stand for thousands of years. That kind of thinking requires vision, patience, and a deep sense of purpose. And that is where the pyramids quietly offer us a lesson for our own lives. We live in a world that often moves very quickly. Technology changes rapidly. Information travels instantly. It can sometimes feel as if everything is temporary. But the pyramids remind us that the greatest achievements in human history often come from long-term thinking, from patience, from the willingness to build something meaningful, even if the full result may not be seen in our own lifetime. The people who designed the pyramids probably never imagined that millions of people, thousands of years later, would still be studying their work. Yet their dedication created something that continues to inspire curiosity across the entire planet. Maybe that is the deeper message hidden within these ancient stones. We do not have to build pyramids to leave something meaningful behind. But we can choose to approach our lives with the same sense of intention, to create, to learn, to explore, and to contribute something that lasts beyond the moment we are living in right now. Curiosity, patience, and the courage to ask questions have always been the driving forces behind human progress. And in many ways, the pyramids stand as monuments to those very qualities. Before we finish this journey together, I'd love to hear what you think. Do you believe the pyramids still hide secrets that we haven't discovered yet? Or do you think we already understand most of their story? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below so everyone watching can see different perspectives. And if you enjoy exploring mysteries like this and want to keep discovering more hidden stories from history, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps this channel continue creating thoughtful videos and uncovering fascinating topics in the future.